Colin Howell lived in a religious, close-knit community in Northern Ireland. He was a successful dentist, a charismatic preacher on the weekends, and known around town as a devout family man. He had 3 children with his wife Leslie, who was pregnant again. To those on the outside, they seemed to have a perfect life. But the facade soon shattered when a member of their congregation spotted Howell with Hazel Buchanan, a Sunday school teacher, with whom he was having a sordid affair. Hazel's husband, Trevor, was a well-known and respected police officer. The affair was passionate, and the two would meet wherever they could, even having liaisons on Colin's dental chair. After being reported to the church, Hazel and Colin were canceled to confess to their partners. Colin's wife and Hazel's husband, though devastated, were guided by the church and their faith to forgive their partners and trust their vow to end the affair. But the affair only grew more intense and impassioned, and everyone in town seemed to know. In May of 1991, a car was found in a garage, the engine running and pumping fumes into the car's cabin. The garage belonged to the father of Leslie, Colin Howell's wife. Inside the car, Leslie was slumped over in the back seat, clutching photographs of her children and wearing headphones with religious music playing. In the front seat was Hazel's husband, Trevor, dead from exhaust fumes according to the autopsy report. Police concluded that Leslie and Trevor had made a suicide pact after discovering their partner's secret affairs. Shortly after the funerals, Colin and Hazel openly became a couple. They would separate after only 5 years. It was nearly the perfect murder. 7 years later, in 1998, Colin's reputation had recovered. His dentistry was thriving. He was living in a mansion with its own lake, and he was remarried to a woman he had met during Bible studies class, named Kyle. Kyle had been charmed by his charisma and biblical knowledge, and she agreed to marry Colin after just 5 months. One day, while Colin's wife Kyle fed their 7-month-old son, Colin sat opposite to her and made this shocking confession. Not only had he been unfaithful to his first wife, but he'd also murdered her and the husband of his mistress, and placed their bodies to make it look like a double suicide. Kyle pleaded with him to go to the police and promised that she would stand by him and visit him in prison. She convinced him to make a public confession that would take place with both their families and the church elders. Colin made a reservation at the burned-out hotel in Newcastle, Colorado, where he planned to make his confession, which Kyle believed would end in an arrest and incarceration. However, when Colin's father called and told him that he couldn't make it to the Sawyer, Collins took that as a sign from God that he should not reveal his secret. That Sunday he went to church and claimed a girl delivered him a message. She said, quote, "Colin, I just don't know why I'm telling you this, but your sins are forgiven and forgotten by God." From this moment on, whenever Kyle demanded he confess, Colin would threaten to kill himself. She kept his secret for the sake of their children for over 10 more years. They also had another 4 children in this time. But as the years went by, more and more disturbing confessions emerged. First, he would admit that he was addicted to pornography. Later, he admitted to Kyle that he had been sexually abusing women under heavy sedation at his dentistry practice. Finally, in 2008, he sold his share of 2 dental practices while facing a mounting tax bill. He used the money to invest in a scam, which offered £8 million to attempt to recover gold from caves in the Philippines, gold that was supposedly left by Japanese troops in World War II. Colin planned to give some of his profits to the church and use the rest to retire in Florida. He soon realized, though, that he had been conned. He later claimed it was at this moment, which made him decide to confess. He said, quote, "You'll never be a free person unless you confess. And be really honest," Kyle urged him again and again. 18 years after the covered-up murder, Colin confessed to church elders and then to the police. Colin, who the media then dubbed the Driller Killer, because of his dentistry practice, was charged with murder alongside his previous partner. Hazel. Colin confessed that, since divorce was outlawed by the church, he made another plan to be with his mistress while his wife had been asleep. He put a hose pipe, emitting fumes from his car, into her mouth. He covered her face with a quilt when she woke up and held it there until she died. He then dressed her corpse, threw her in the trunk, and drove to the home of Hazel and Trevor. Hazel let him in where Trevor was passed out. She had crushed up pills and put them in his food. Trevor awoke as Colin forced the same hose into his mouth. But Colin prevailed and Trevor quickly died. Colin and Hazel then set the suicide scene in Leslie's dad's garage. Colin pled guilty to murder. He gave the court the sordid details of his affair with Hazel. They met at a pool while their children attended the same swimming lesson. Hazel soon became a patient at Colin's dentistry. At one point, she had a secret abortion in London. After becoming pregnant with his baby, he confessed that he drugged Hazel while testing the dosage for the murders. While she was unconscious in the dentist chair, he would copulate with her. Colin was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum of 21 years. A little later, he was sentenced to another 5.5 years for assaulting female patients while they were sedated at his dentistry practice. Hazel denied the guilty charges, pleading that she was also a victim to Colin. Sexual depravity. She claimed she was terrified of him and lured into his evil web. Hazel told police during interviews, quote, "He was very controlling. Maybe I was easy prey. And that's how I look back on it and see that he was a very calculating person. A very clever guy, and not very bright, unfortunately. But he was a step ahead of me the whole time. I was scared. I thought if I say something against this, he'll kill me," Hazel sobbed. A jury of 9 men and 3 women refused to believe her and found her guilty. She was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 18 years. The confessions rocked the community as they were faced with the hypocrisy of a highly respected professional's religious values and the depravity of these gruesome acts. While friends and family are now relieved that a painful chapter in their lives has been closed, no act of justice or years behind bars can bring back Leslie, a mother to 4 children, now practically parentless, nor Trevor, a beloved father of 2. Also tormented by this web of lies is Colin's wife, Kyle, who was forced to hide her husband's horrific lies. For over a decade, Kyle told the press, quote, "Everyone thought he was this great Christian guy, but they were so wrong. He was a monster." On May 25, 2013, Mark McDermott and his wife, Joanna Dunn, were in their West Virginia home, preparing for a college graduation party for Joanna's son, Donald. Mark McDermott was a successful Australian businessman who had found love meeting Joanna, married her, and treated her son like he was his own. Donald and Mark had become very close. Mark took his stepson on trips out of the country and bought him whatever he wanted, including a nice car and luxury clothes. According to a close friend of Donald, when Mark and his mother had separated for a short time, Donald insisted on living with his stepfather, not with his mother. Mark was also paying Donald's college tuition at Marshall University. On the day of Donald's supposed graduation, police received a strange call. calling from inside her home. Joanna calmly confessed to shooting her husband Mark in the head. Raleigh County Sheriff Sergeant Greg Cade was one of the first to arrive on the scene and observed Donald's mother in a state of shock and a man slumped over the couch with 2 gunshot wounds to the head. The murder weapon was on the dining room table. The police also discovered a typed-up suicide note, apparently written by Joanna to her son Donald. Officers took Joanna into custody, and Donald was brought to make a statement. Donald repeated his initial story. He had been in the shower when his mother had shot his father. Joanna's interrogation, however, took a turn when she revealed that Donald had been the one to shoot Mark. The police captain noticed that Donald's behavior was odd. Quote, "He was just as plain as could be. He never was emotional, he was never upset. He never was angry, he was just pretty much flat the entire time," said Captain Bear. It only took a little prodding for Donald to reveal his crime and the secret that he had killed to cover up. According to Donald, he had flunked out of Marshall University several years prior to the graduation party that was now planned for that fateful day. He had been kicked out due to poor grades, despite academic warnings. Donald had fabricated report cards to convince everyone, including his own fiancée, that he was still in school. He created very realistic schedules of leaving for class and locking himself in his room to study. He fooled all of his friends and family. Donald knew that he would be exposed on the day of his graduation and began planning the murders around spring break. He started going to the gun range and was target practicing almost every week. He had intended to make the crime look like a murder, suicide, but when Joanna had come home that day, Donald had already murdered Mark. He sat Joanna down on the bench and asked her to close her eyes for a surprise. Expecting it to be a gift related to his graduation, Joanna closed her eyes and Donald put a gun to her temple and pulled the trigger, except the gun failed to fire because of a simple malfunction, which saved Joanna's life. Realizing that the surprise was a gun, she opened her eyes and managed to knock the gun away. Joanna then convinced Donald to let her call the police if she took the rap for the murder. Donald agreed, which led to her strange 911 call and forced confession. After only 5 hours of questioning, Donald confessed as to why he planned the murder. He said, quote, "It wasn't really the thought of upsetting them. I guess it was the thought of losing a vehicle, losing a place to live, losing fancy custom shoes and junk like that." During his confession, he told police he thought he would get sick or upset after murdering his stepfather, but that he never felt those symptoms of regret. Mark's family in Australia was devastated at the loss of the big-hearted, jovial family man. Quote, "Still to this day, I'll never make sense of it, because it's just a heartless monster that was born and took my brother, who lost his life for showing too much love," said Mark's sister Tracy McDermott. Donald never expressed remorse for his actions. To detectives, he even said that he would do it all again. Donald was sentenced to life in prison, and his most recent appeal has been denied. Shockingly, his mother Joanna still maintains a relationship with her son, visiting him in prison despite him taking the love of her life and nearly taking her own life as well, to the confusion of many close to her. Tragedy struck the Byrne family on February 13th, 2016, when emergency services in the small village of Theydon Boyce, located in Essex, England, were alerted to a terrible accident which had occurred in the family home. Darren Byrne, a 40-year-old father of 2, placed a call to local authorities after he returned home from walking the family dog to find his wife, 35-year-old Maria Byrne dead in the kitchen. She had been making a bacon sandwich for her husband when something went very wrong, and she was likely engulfed in flames and had burned to death by the time Darren Byrne returned from his walk. It all seemed to be a terrible instance of misfortune that led to Maria's death. That is until a post-mortem examination by authorities revealed that Maria's clothes had been doused in white spirit, more commonly known as mineral spirits in the US, a highly flammable paint thinner and accelerant. Immediately, authorities deduced that foul play was likely involved in Maria Byrne's death, and so a murder investigation was opened. In the weeks that followed, Darren Byrne's story began to unravel as the horrifying truth began to surface. Maria Byrne's death was anything but a tragic accident. As investigators pieced together the facts, they discovered that Darren Byrne had been engaging in a long-term extramarital affair with his osteopath, an affair that Maria had discovered. Darren Byrne insisted that he would end things with the other woman, and the couple seemed to be patching things up, even planning a trip to the United States from their Essex town for Darren's upcoming birthday. Everything came crashing down, however, on the day of Maria's death, because she found her husband's secret prepaid phone, which contained text messages which proved the affair was anything but over. Despite Maria's best effort to save their marriage, her husband had continued to destroy their family for his own pleasure. Furious at her husband's brazen lies and infidelity, Maria confronted him in the kitchen while their two boys, Harry and Oliver, were spending the weekend with her parents. The verbal confrontation became physical when Darren Byrne bludgeoned Maria with enough force to knock her out. The sheer brutality of this assault should have been enough to break through whatever rage had engulfed Darren Byrne and lead him to immediately seek emergency medical services for his unconscious wife. Instead, Darren Byrne displayed pure evil no one who knew him could have ever predicted. With his wife now unconscious on the kitchen floor, Darren Byrne retrieved a bottle of paint thinner and douched the mother of his children in the flammable liquid. He proceeded to light his wife on fire and turn on the gas stove, hoping to spark an explosion or burn the whole house down and escape responsibility for this cold-blooded murder. After prepping their family home to burn down, Darren nonchalantly took their dog on a long walk through the surrounding area. CCTV footage captured Darren Byrne's attempt at an alibi while his wife burned to death in their kitchen. About an hour and a half after leaving, Darren Byrne returned to the scene of the crime, hoping that Maria's death would look like the result of a gas leak or another accidental explosion. The house had, to Darren's dismay, remained standing, so he quickly moved Maria's body from the middle of the kitchen to directly next to the stove. Then, faking all the anguish and horror he could muster, he called 999 for local UK emergency services. He said, quote, "My wife is dead. She is dead. She is burnt badly," Maria's mother, Linda, recalls a refusal by the family to even begin to question any involvement Darren may have had in their daughter's death. Darren even stayed overnight with Maria's family and his sons after being released from questioning by police, insisting he could never have contributed to Maria's accidental death despite Maria's family being willing to take his word for this. Linda was aware of Darren's affair and Maria's attempts to save the collapsing marriage. Despite Darren's actions, Maria had also confided before her death that Darren's behavior had been turning more emotionally manipulative and controlling, though she assured her mother that Darren would never harm her physically. The day after Darren was released from questioning, police arrived at Linda's home and arrested him in light of the suspicious facts surrounding Maria's death. After a 3-week trial in November of 2016, Darren Byrne was found guilty of murder and arson charges by jury verdict in the Chelmsford Crown Court and sentenced to a minimum of 24 years to life. The unbelievable evil displayed by Darren Byrne on February 13, 2016, extends far past the impact of Maria's parents, losing their daughter Harry and Oliver, just 6 and 4 years old, respectively, will now grow up without a mother or a father and will eventually have to learn the horrible truth about their father's role in Maria's death. At the time of Darren's arrest, they were simply told that Maria had been in a terrible accident and that their father was helping police solve the case. The psychological toll that the truth will have on Harry and Oliver is sure to be tremendous, and a window into the fallout from Darren Byrne's indescribably evil actions. While justice has been served through the judicial process, nothing can bring back a beloved mother and daughter taken from this world far too soon.